Hello, my friends. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments so we can see how far these stories travel. And don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so YouTube keeps bringing you more chilling stories like these. I wasn't expecting much when I moved to this town. You know the kind, those sleepy, postcard-perfect places where everyone knows everyone's business, and the occasional gossip floats through the air like dust in the sun. I wanted peace. After everything that had happened in the city, I needed a fresh start. The house I found wasn't much, small, a little rundown, but it was all I could afford. It sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood with white picket fences and perfectly manicured lawns. No neighbors for at least a few yards on either side. It was exactly what I needed. At first, the town felt welcoming. The grocery store owners smiled at me, the postman waved. But as the days turned to weeks, I began to notice something odd. It started with little things, the way people would stare at me when I walked down the street, or how some of them would quickly change the subject when I tried to ask about certain parts of the town. But the strangest thing was my neighbors, the family next door, the Wrights. There was Mr. Wright, a tall man with dark, wiry hair that always seemed to be just a little too messy. His wife, Elaine, had a kind face, but there was something about her smile that never quite reached her eyes. And then there were the kids, a boy and a girl, always running around in the yard, playing games I couldn't quite figure out. The way they looked at me sometimes, I couldn't shake the feeling they were studying me. But the real oddity began when the sun went down. It wasn't obvious at first, but over time, I began to hear things coming from their house. At first, it was just faint murmurs, like a conversation in another room, but no one was ever visible. I chalked it up to thin walls, maybe. Then I started hearing things at night, shuffling sounds from their yard, light footsteps across the wooden floors inside. The sound of someone crying, barely audible but unmistakable. My curiosity got the best of me one evening, and I decided to walk over and say hello, maybe try to break the ice. But when I knocked on their door, it was Mr. Wright who answered. He looked a little surprised, though not unpleasant. "Can I help you?" he asked, his smile a bit forced. "Just wanted to introduce myself," I said, offering a hand. "I'm your neighbor, moved in last week." He shook my hand, but his grip was too firm, too quick. "Well, I'll let Elaine know you stopped by. Come back anytime." It was the way he said it, though, like he was trying too hard to be friendly, and like he didn't want me there. I smiled awkwardly and left, but as I walked back to my house, I felt the unmistakable weight of someone's eyes on me. I turned around, but there was no one in the windows. Still, the feeling lingered. It wasn't until a few days later that I saw something that truly unsettled me. It was just after dinner, and I was sitting in my living room with the blinds cracked open, trying to enjoy a quiet evening when I saw Elaine in her yard, standing completely still, facing the back of the house. Her eyes were wide open, and her hands hung limply by her sides. She didn't seem to be moving at all. I couldn't see her face clearly from where I was, but there was something about her posture that felt wrong. Her stillness unnerved me. Was she waiting for something, someone? I couldn't help myself. I stepped outside, telling myself I was just being paranoid, and walked to the edge of the property line. I figured I'd wave to her, break the tension. But as I got closer, I noticed something even more disturbing. The children were outside too, staring at me from the corner of their yard. They weren't playing or running around. They just stood there, eyes fixed on me, the same unreadable look on their faces that I'd seen too many times. Before I could say anything, Elaine turned and walked back into the house. The children followed without a word. I stood there for a moment, frozen, as the hair on the back of my neck prickled. Something wasn't right. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing faint whispers from the direction of their house, coming through the walls, through the air. It was as if they were just out of reach, always just out of earshot, like the last note of a song that fades too soon. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the strange sensation that something was wrong, something deeper than the oddities of the rites. Around 2 a.m., the whispers stopped, and then I heard it, a heavy thud, a dragging sound like something or someone was moving across the floor inside their house. A loud crash followed, then silence. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police if something was truly wrong. But before I could even unlock the screen, I heard something outside my window, a soft, almost imperceptible tapping. I froze. There was someone out there. They were waiting. I dared to look outside. The yard was dark, but there, standing in the shadows of the Wright's house, was a figure. The outline of a person, just barely visible but clearly there. They didn't move, didn't even breathe. I felt sick. I backed away from the window, my body trembling, and when I looked back again, the figure was gone. The next morning, I was determined to get answers. I went next door, my nerves twisted in knots. I knocked again, but this time it was Mr. Wright who answered. It was Elaine. She opened the door just a crack, and her eyes flickered with recognition before quickly darting away. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice shaking. "I heard some noises last night. Something happened, didn't it? Is everyone okay?" She hesitated for a long time before speaking. Her voice was a hoarse whisper. "You shouldn't have heard that. It's not for you to know." I wanted to ask more, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, and I could feel the panic setting in. Before I could say anything else, she closed the door, leaving me standing there. I didn't know what to do. The Wrights were hiding something big, but what? Over the next few days, I kept my distance, watching their house from the safety of my living room window. The house, once so inviting, now felt suffocating. The whispers grew louder and the air grew heavier. It felt like there were eyes on me everywhere I went. Then late one night, I saw something that confirmed all my suspicions. I had been sitting on my porch when I noticed a light flickering in the Wright's window. It wasn't just the usual flicker of a broken bulb. It was deliberate, rhythmic, almost like a signal. I grabbed my phone, unsure whether to call the authorities or not. But as I stepped toward the door to get a better look, I froze. There, standing in the yard just beyond the shadows, was Mr. Wright. His face was pale, his eyes wild, and his hands trembled as he held something behind his back. For a brief moment, our eyes locked, and that's when I saw it. He wasn't alone. The children were there too, but they weren't looking at me. They were staring at him, their faces contorted in an unnatural way, like they were waiting for him to do something. I didn't wait to find out what that something was. I ran. I packed my bags and left the town that night. But the thing is, I still think about it. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers, the shuffling footsteps, and the faint tapping on my window. I don't know what's behind the walls of that house. I don't know what the Wrights were hiding, but there are some things that can never be unseen. And I'm not sure if I'll ever truly escape what I left behind those closed doors. I'd been driving for hours. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the dark stretch of highway ahead felt endless. The GPS had stopped working about an hour ago, and I had no cell service. The road was deserted, just miles of trees and a few worn-out signs that seemed to tell me nothing. I had planned to take the highway to a small town where I could refuel, maybe grab a bite to eat before I made the final leg of my trip. But as the miles stretched on, I started to feel more and more isolated. That's when I saw the sign, Hollow Pines 20 miles. I didn't know much about the town, but I didn't have many options. I decided to take the exit, hopping for gas, food, maybe even some kind of rest before I continued. The turnoff was narrow and poorly lit, and the gravel road was in bad shape. There was no one around, no other cars, no sign of life. It felt like the kind of place where people went to disappear. As I drove deeper into the woods, the road grew rougher, the trees closing in, and it became clear that this town hadn't seen much in the way of development in years. When I finally saw a few lights in the distance, I thought I'd hit the town, but instead, I was faced with a rundown gas station and a handful of dilapidated buildings. I pulled up to the station, hoping there'd be a sign of life. The station was old, its pumps covered in rust, and the roof looked like it could cave in any minute. The neon lights buzzed faintly and the store door was cracked open. A man stood behind the counter. He was tall, a bit too thin, with a scruffy beard and a heavy, tired look in his eyes. He didn't greet me with the usual politeness I'd expect in a small town. Instead, he just stared. "Need gas?" he asked, barely glancing at me. "Yeah, and maybe something to eat," I replied, trying to keep it light. "Is there a hotel around here?" He paused, eyeing me for a beat too long. "Ain't much in Hollow Pines. You won't find anywhere to stay." I frowned. "Not even a motel?" "No," he said flatly, "not around here." I nodded, not wanting to press. As I pumped the gas, I could feel his gaze on me, and I couldn't shake the thought that something was off about this place. It didn't feel abandoned, but it didn't feel alive either. I headed back toward the door, intending to buy a snack for the road, but before I could open it, I heard a loud crash from the back of the station. I turned around, confused, but the man didn't react. He just stared at me. I waited, but the noise didn't come again. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, it's fine," he replied too quickly. "Just a shelf falling over." I didn't buy it, but I didn't press the issue either. Something about the way he said it made me uneasy. I grabbed a granola bar and a drink and paid him quickly, eager to leave. But as I walked toward my car, I noticed something else. There were no other cars here, no signs of people. It felt wrong. I pulled away, hopping to put the station behind me, but as I drove, the road began to feel more and more like a maze. The trees were so thick on either side that I couldn't see anything outside of the car. I'd passed a few turns, but none of them seemed to lead anywhere familiar. And then I saw it, a car parked off to the side of the road, hidden under some brush. It was an old sedan, one that looked like it hadn't moved in years. No one was inside, but there was something unsettling about it. The windshield was cracked and there were pieces of trash scattered around. I couldn't understand why anyone would leave it here, miles from anywhere. As I continued driving, the feeling of being watched crept over me again. Every turn felt wrong, every shadow seemed deeper. I turned my headlights up, scanning the road for signs of the town, but it was like I was stuck in some kind of loop. Suddenly, there was a flash in my rearview mirror, a figure running alongside my car. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing, but when I looked back, there was nothing there. The road was empty. I told myself it was just my imagination, the fatigue, the isolation, but that feeling of being followed, of being watched, stayed with me. By now, I was getting desperate. I needed to find a way out. I wasn't sure what I was afraid of. Maybe it was the silence, the isolation, or the strange feeling that something was just a little off about this town. That's when I saw him. A man standing in the middle of the road. He didn't seem to be moving, just standing there staring at my car as I approached. He was tall, gaunt, wearing a dark jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in years. His face was pale, his eyes wide, almost unblinking. He didn't step aside or wave me through. He just watched. I slowed down, unsure of what to do. My hand hovered over the horn, but I didn't honk. Something about this felt like a bad idea. The man stepped forward slowly, too slowly. "Everything okay?" I called through the window, my voice tight with anxiety. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a dirty piece of paper. He held it up to the window. I rolled down the window just enough to take a look. It was a map, Hollow Pines circled in red. There was no legend, no explanation, just a few scribbled lines leading into the woods. "You don't want to go down this road," he said, his voice a rasp. "Not anymore." I froze. I wanted to ask him why, but before I could, he turned and started walking into the trees. I watched him disappear into the dark. Something in my gut told me to leave now, but I didn't. I stared at the map, the red circle mocking me, beckoning me. I finally decided to keep going, hopping to find something, anything, that would make sense of this situation. But the further I drove, the less I felt in control of the situation. The road was dark, too dark. The trees seemed to close in more tightly, and I was starting to feel that same oppressive silence from earlier, the feeling that something was waiting just outside the edge of the headlights. And then out of nowhere, my car lurched to a stop. I tried the ignition, nothing. I got out and popped the hood, but there was nothing obviously wrong. The engine wasn't smoking or leaking, just dead, completely dead. I stood there looking down the road, feeling that same strange pressure on my chest, like I wasn't supposed to be here. Before I could decide my next move, a car passed me slowly, too slowly. I turned to watch it, but it didn't stop, just drove on without a care. The driver's face was hidden in the shadows, but I saw his eyes for a split second, dark and empty. The car disappeared into the night. I didn't wait around long after that. I grabbed my things, locked the car, and started walking. By the time I found my way back to the highway, I was exhausted, shaken, and scared out of my mind. But no matter how far I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still watching me. When I finally made it back to a more populated road, I flagged down a passing car. A couple of strangers gave me a ride to the nearest town, and I never looked back. Hollow Pines, I don't know what happened there. Maybe I'll never know. I never thought the library could feel like a trap. It was supposed to be the safest place in town. I'd worked there for 3 years, alone most shifts, and the worst I dealt with was a kid hiding a soda can between the shelves. But that afternoon, everything changed. He stood in front of me, blocking the aisle. A man I'd never seen before. His jacket zipped tight, his eyes unreadable, his boots crusted with mud that didn't belong to our town. And under that jacket, I'd glimpsed the handle of a knife. When he asked about the doors, about me locking them at night, I realized this wasn't about books. This wasn't about shelter. He had come for something else, for me. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Look, I don't want trouble. If you need money, I don't have much. If you need food, there's a diner across the street. You don't need to stay here." He tilted his head slightly, almost like he was studying me. "You're alone." Every instinct screamed not to answer, but the silence between us stretched so long it felt like he could hear my heart pounding. "Yes," I whispered. That word sealed my fate. His expression shifted, not relief, not anger, but something worse. Intention. He stepped closer. I stepped back. The bookshelves boxed me in, and I realized how easily he could corner me here. I had 2 choices: freeze and wait for whatever he wanted to happen, or take control before he did. I moved first. I shoved the cart of books between us and bolted toward the front desk. My shoes slapped against the wood floor as I ran, my mind screaming, "Hit the alarm, hit the alarm." But he was faster than I thought. His hand grabbed the back of my sweater just as I reached the desk. I twisted, ripping free, the fabric tearing with a sickening sound. My hand slammed down under the counter, fumbling for the small red button hidden there. His fist came down on my wrist before I could press it. The pain shot up my arm, white-hot, and I cried out. "No," he growled. I stared into his face then, close enough to see the stubble on his jaw, the thin scar running from his temple to his ear. His eyes were calm, too calm, like he'd done this before. "What do you want?" I gasped. "You know why I'm here," he said. But I didn't. God, I didn't. I wanted to scream at him, demand answers, but I knew pushing him could make it worse. My only thought was survival. The sound of the library door opening cut through the tension. Both our heads snapped toward it. Clara. She'd come after all, carrying a paper bag from the diner, her face bright until she saw him. "Who?" she started, then froze as her eyes landed on the knife in his hand. He moved fast, grabbing me by the arm and yanking me close, the blade glinting just enough for Clara to see. "Lock the door," he ordered her. Her hands shook so badly she fumbled with the latch, but she did it. I wanted to scream at her to run, but she was just as trapped as me now. "Sit," he told her, motioning to the nearest table. She obeyed, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. Now it wasn't just me, he had both of us. Minutes crawled by, thick and unbearable. He didn't speak much, only paced, keeping the knife visible, his gaze flicking between us. I tried to think, tried to piece together why he'd chosen the library. Why us? Why now? Finally, Clara found her voice. "Please, you don't have to do this. Whatever you're running from, we can help." He stopped packing, turned slowly toward her. "You can't help, not anymore." "Then why us?" I blurted out. His eyes landed on me and I instantly regretted asking. But instead of exploding, he smiled, a thin, chilling stretch of lips. "Because you saw me," he said. The words sent ice down my spine. Saw him. I'd never seen this man in my life. Or had I? A flicker of memory hit me then 2 weeks ago, driving home late at night, passing a broken-down truck at the edge of town. A man standing beside it, hood pulled up. I'd slowed just for a second and our eyes had met in the headlights before I drove on. Him? Was he punishing me for not stopping? Before I could respond, he moved closer, pressing the knife just enough against my side to make my breath hitch. "You'll do what I say," he murmured. My brain raced. If he'd followed me all this time, if he'd chosen the library because it was isolated, then waiting for rescue wasn't an option. No one else would come in before closing. It was on us. Clara caught my eye, just a flicker, but I understood. She was ready to move if I gave her the chance. I forced myself to act casual. "I need water," I said. "Please, my mouth's dry." He hesitated, then nodded toward the break room. "Go slowly." I walked, my legs shaking, every step feeling like it might be my last. In the break room, I grabbed the first thing I saw, a heavy glass coffee pot. My hand gripped the handle tight, my knuckles white. When I stepped back out, his eyes were on Clara, his knife lowered just slightly as he barked something at her. That was my moment. I swung the pot with everything I had. The glass shattered against his shoulder and he roared, stumbling back. Clara screamed, bolting from the chair. I grabbed her hand and together we ran for the door. He was on us in seconds. The knife slashed through the air, missing my arm by inches. I fumbled with the lock, panic surging as the metal refused to turn. Clara shoved me aside, her fingers working faster, and finally the door clicked open. We burst out onto the street, screaming for help. 2 men from the diner rushed over at the sound, and behind us, the stranger appeared in the doorway, blood dripping from his arm where the glass had cut him. His calm expression was gone now, replaced by pure fury. He raised the knife, ready to charge. But the men tackled him before he could take a step. The knife clattered onto the pavement. Shouts filled the air. Sirens followed minutes later. When the police cuffed him, I expected answers. A name, a reason, something. But he said nothing, not a word, as they dragged him away. And that silence was the worst part. Because now, every time I walk into the library, I wonder, was it random? Or did he choose me long before that day? And if it wasn't random, who else in town might still be watching me, waiting for their chance? I never believed the warnings about the woods outside Crestwood. Everyone in town had a story about someone going missing or finding something strange by the old creek, but I had always shrugged them off. That is, until the summer I decided to take the back roads home from my job at the hardware store. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows that turned the familiar streets into something uncanny. The air had that sticky, late July heat, and the cicadas were deafening. I should have taken Main Street like I always did, but I wanted to save time. I wanted to cut through the woods trail behind the Henderson property. That was my first mistake. The trail was narrow, overgrown, and almost immediately, I felt that weird sense of being watched. Nothing obvious, no eyes, no shapes, just pressure. Like something was packing me from just outside my field of vision. I stopped, listened. The wind was still, the trees didn't move, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling. I told myself I was imagining it. Just nerves, I muttered, but even saying it out loud didn't help. I kept walking. About 15 minutes in, I heard it, a twig snapping behind me. Quick, sharp, deliberate. I froze, my heart hammering. My flashlight didn't reach far enough into the dense underbrush, and the path seemed to close in with every step I took. I strained my ears, nothing else. I picked up my pace. The snapping came again, slightly ahead of me this time, almost as if it were echoing my movements. My stomach knotted. Something wasn't right. I should have turned back, but my pride, the kind that fools you into thinking you can handle more than you really can, kept me moving forward. Then I saw it. A figure, just a shadow at first, standing perfectly still between two large oaks. Too tall, too stiff. My flashlight flicked over it and it vanished. I spun, scanning the woods behind me. Nothing. I told myself it was a trick of the light, an old log, maybe even a deer. But deep down, I knew better. That pause, that vanish, it was intentional. Someone was there, waiting, watching. My pace quickened, then broke into a run. The underbrush tore at my jeans and scratched my arms. I stumbled over a root and landed hard, scraping my hands. My flashlight tumbled across the dirt, and when I grabbed it, I caught another glimpse of the figure. Closer. Closer than it had any right to be. I bolted, hearing the sound of feet behind me, soft, careful, yet perfectly in sync with mine. Panic clawed at me. I ran blindly, branches whipping across my face. My lungs burned, and I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears, mixing with the crunch of footsteps behind me. I reached the creek, thinking it would slow whoever was following me. The water was shallow, but the slippery rocks made me cautious. Then I heard it, a low, deliberate voice. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. No one. The trees swayed, but no shape. My flashlight flickered, throwing jagged shadows. I ran across the creek, splashing water into my shoes. Every instinct screamed to get out of the woods, but the trail ahead seemed endless. Then I tripped again, this time landing against a thick tree trunk. My hand slid across the bark and my flashlight went out completely. Darkness swallowed me. And in that darkness, I felt it. Someone, something standing too close. My breath caught, I couldn't move, couldn't see, couldn't think. Then a whisper, "Why are you running?" I screamed and scrambled backward, falling hard into the mud. The sound of snapping twigs followed, circling me now. Not ahead, not behind, all around. I tried to calm myself, tried to think logically. There was no supernatural here, no monsters, just someone stalking me, someone waiting for me to make a mistake. I knew one thing for certain. If they caught me out here, no one would find me until it was too late. I forced myself to stand and started moving again, slowly, carefully, listening. The footsteps mirrored mine. Every time I tried to break into a run, they did too. Hours felt like minutes, and the sun had dipped below the horizon. The woods had turned into a black maze. I recognized nothing. The landmarks I knew were gone. The small creek that cut through the property twisted like a snake. Then finally I saw lights in the distance. Faint, yellow, moving headlights, a car. I ran full sprint, screaming. My voice tore through the silent trees. The figure hesitated. I didn't look back. I burst onto the gravel road that led to the town's edge. The headlights belonged to an old pickup. I waved my arms, screaming for help. The truck stopped. A man leaned out, local, older, recognized him instantly as a neighbor, and I shouted. Someone was following me, in the woods. He jumped out before I could finish and ran toward the tree line with a flashlight. The woods were empty. The shadows had disappeared. No trace. Nothing. I collapsed in the dirt, shaking. My heart wouldn't stop. My hands were raw from branches and mud. But worst of all, I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't left. Not really. Weeks later, I heard the rumors. Another camper gone missing along the same trail near the creek. I stopped taking shortcuts through the woods after that. I never went back. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear footsteps just outside my window. I never meant to become the center of anything. I wanted a quiet life, a job at the diner, a small house with a weed-patched lawn, a couple of beers on a Friday, and a TV that never needed changing. Then I saw what happened on Mulberry Street, and I kept seeing it until I could no longer pretend it was somebody else's problem. By the time this comes to the end, I'll be scarred in ways the mirror won't show. That's how it goes in small places. You know everyone's names and their grudges, and sometimes your memory will keep the shape of what you saw when you try to forget. I learned two things fast. 1, power here doesn't wear a suit, it wears a smile. 2, if you try to pull that smile off, people will try to pull you apart. It started with a phone. Not special, an old model I found in a glove compartment. The battery barely held a charge. It had one saved voice clip. I only listened because I was bored and because I still kept the habit of listening to other people's messes. I shouldn't have. The clip was 8 seconds long, a recorded conversation between Sam Coulter, the town's philanthropist, owner of the feed store, sponsor of the Little League, and Sheriff Halbridge. The words were casual, the kind of talk you'd expect between men who share too much whiskey and fewer scruples. They were arranging something. The clip ended with a phrase that cut through me: make sure he doesn't make it to the county line. It's impossible to explain the flip in your stomach when you realize the people in charge will kill to keep their control. It's an even worse twist when you remember the man they wanted to silence was my brother. He was not a saint. He got in with the wrong crowd. He owed people money. He'd lied and panicked. But he wasn't someone who should disappear. Not without a paper trail, not without someone somewhere noticing. I took that clip, and I did the only stupid, infuriatingly brave thing a person with nothing left to lose does. I told a friend. I told Mara at the diner because she'd been with me through too many nights to count. She had a way of asking questions that made answers fall out like teeth. We came up with a plan: quiet, simple, record more proof, get it to the state attorney. We would be careful. We had to be. But that was the point where the town's soft veneer started to show cracks. People we thought were allies weren't, and people we trusted vanished into silence. By the time the showdown started to feel inevitable, there were 3 facts I could not shake. The sheriff was on Sam's payroll. My brother was missing. Someone had found out that I knew. That last fact turned this from a dangerous secret into a personal hunt. I prepared like a man about to lose everything. I borrowed a handgun from an uncle who'd been in the service and who'd always looked at me like I might break at any second. I learned how to load it well enough. I packed a backpack with water, a tow rope, my pocket knife, and a flashlight whose batteries might die before dawn. I memorized the old roads better than the lines on the map on my kitchen table. The town had a spine. I intended to stick to it. The meeting point, the place everything would shake loose, was the mill. The Hargreaves sawmill sits on the edge of town, half active, half memory. In the summers, it smelled of fresh-cut pine and grease. By winter, it was a cavernous place where shadows stacked into corners. It's the kind of place that absorbs voices. People go in loud and come out smaller. It was neutral ground for deals no one discussed in daylight. If Sam wanted to keep something hidden, the mill was where you put it. The plan was reckless by design. Mara and I decided I would walk into the mill with nothing but the old phone and a recorder on my jacket. I would pretend to be a guy with money owed, a small timer offering to speak to Sam. Mara would tail the sheriff's van from the diner and record license plates. We would get the sheriff's confession on tape if we could, and I'd slip out. The state attorney would hear it. The sheriff would lose his badge. People would go to jail. The arithmetic of it seemed simple. Real life is less tidy. 2 nights before the meeting, the first sign of trouble came in the form of a light in my kitchen window at 3 in the morning. I was awake because I can't sleep when I'm planning, so I saw the shadow against the curtains, 2 brief silhouettes, the unmistakable slouch of men waiting. They left before I realized what I was doing. I opened my door and called their bluff. Nobody answered. I called Mara. She told me to get out of town, to stop being a hero. I told her the clip in my pocket had already made me one. The second sign was more intimate. Someone cut my phone line, not with finesse, with a butcher's instinct, a jagged rip on the wire outside that meant a pair of hands had studied my house and decided to silence me. I bought a burner phone the next day with cash I had tucked in a sock. I told myself it was for the plan. I lied even to myself about what I feared most. Then my brother disappeared. He had been in a bar the night before, drunk and loud, making the kind of scene that had him living off reprieve. The bartender told me he left with 2 men. No one else thought it strange. In town, people who owe money go home with men and never come back. In town, people learn to fold those losses into their lives. But my brother had been the kind of brother who called at dawn to rant and then at noon to apologize. He didn't vanish because his debt collectors were efficient. He vanished because someone with power wanted a message sent. Stay quiet or you will go missing. That changed my options. Running to the state felt painfully slow. If my brother was tied up in a barn outside town, every second pushed him deeper into whatever plan these men had. The clip meant something different now. It wasn't evidence, it was a timer. The night of the showdown, the sky had the wrong color. Not black, not the blue that sometimes settles over bad weather, but the kind of thin gray that makes headlights look like distant stars. I drove to the mill in silence, leaving 2 blinker lights on my dash like a prayer. The truck's engine sounded like it belonged to someone else. My hands on the wheel reminded me of a child gripping a leash he shouldn't have. I parked in the lot a block away and walked the rest. Walking felt less conspicuous. It also kept me honest. My breath fogged in the air, and under it, my heartbeat came steady as a drum. I kept a small recorder pinned inside my jacket, the burner phone at my hip. The old phone with the clip was in my back pocket like a patient animal. The mill doors were open, 2 wide slabs that once welcomed in logs and now welcomed in secrets. A couple of trucks were outside, and men with baseball caps stood beside them like they were props. Sam was the easiest to spot. He kept moving like a man who is used to being the only thing anyone looks at. He had new shoes, a jacket that cost more than I made in a year, and a calm face that could be rearranged into charm in 2 blinks. Sheriff Halbridge was there too. He had lost the color in his face. Guilt sits differently when you're in public. He met my eyes with a look that tried to be businesslike and failed. When he spotted me, his body tightened. They had brought others, a mix of local heavies, men you pay when you don't want to know the price. They gathered in a semicircle near the mill's pit like predators around a bone. Someone had whiskey, someone else had a lighter cigarette. There were no smiles, not the friendly type. I approached like a dog that knows where it will be kicked. Sam noticed me and walked over, his hand held out like an offering. "You made it," he said. "I admire courage or stupidity, maybe both." "Courage with a cheap recorder," I replied, voice steady. I let the tape roll. He laughed. "You're funny when you're cornered." He waved his hand and the others closed in. I kept my back to the mill door. If someone tried to push me inside, the place bent into a labyrinth of beams and sawdust, good for losing a man, bad for losing evidence. "Where Paul?" I asked, my words sharp, small like pebbles. "You had him last week. You promised him you'd call him a favor." Sam's smile vanished. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said. Sheriff Halbridge answered then, as if reading a script. We don't appreciate accusations shot into our town by visitors. Visitors, I echoed, and somewhere in my throat was a memory of my brother's laugh. He's my brother. That seemed to make them worse. The heavies shifted, tasting the air for movement. The man with the lighter smiled as if I'd told a joke. This was the moment your stomach tells you the show will end badly. I let the recorder gather the words. I let my heart slow into a rhythm. There are things men say only when they think there's nobody writing them down. Good men and bad men both show their teeth sometimes. You have to be ready to count them. Sam leaned in close, voice the size of a whisper. You made a mistake bringing that phone. You thought it would help. You thought the world was clean. I didn't answer. I never trusted my own mouth. I had Mara's hand inside another car that night. She'd parked where she could see the sheriff's van and send me texts if anything moved. The burner phone buzzed once and died. She had been cut off. Sam made a move, subtle, the kind trained hands use at a table when they cover a deck of cards. One of his heavies slid out and reached toward my shoulder. He aimed for the old phone in my back pocket. I acted in a fraction of a second that comes from a different place than planning. I turned, not fast enough to be a miracle but precise enough to shove him. The shove wasn't to start a brawl, it was to create space. He stumbled. Someone else surged. The semicircle of men closed into a ring. That's when my plan split into two things. What I'd rehearsed and what I had to make up. From the shadows near the entrance, a car's headlights suddenly flashed. Not one of theirs. Mara's car. She'd braved the road and come back, methinks to be a witness. The headlights cut the darkness open and gave me hope until I realized the sheriff had already tamped that possibility by calling out his men. He might have been the one to cut the diner's phone lines, but he wasn't so careless as to allow backup. Then someone moved to grab me by the collar. The man's grip was iron, the kind the town's muscle have built up from catching men as they run. I felt the breath of the man near my ear and the smell of tobacco. He pulled me away from Sam like you pull a child away from a dangerous stove and shoved me toward the mill. We moved through the open door and into a world of vertical shadows. Inside, the mill is a place of beams and shafts, high catwalks and piles of wood, the perfect place for a man to get lost or for a plan to go dark. There was a pit in the center. I remembered from 1,000 afternoons playing hooky as a teen. The floorboards were loose there. If you fell, you'd be down a story in a place that used to swallow men whole. They pushed me toward the pit with the roughness of workers moving a crate. I kept my hands in my pockets, but my fingers touched the phone. My thumb found the play button. I hit record in a way I hoped they couldn't see. 3 men forced me forward. I kept talking. It steadied me to hear my own voice. You don't have to do this. There are ways out. The state. State got nothing, Sam cut in. They got too much pride. We run this town, we keep it clean. You don't understand. He'd always used that word, clean. That's how the town justified what it did. Clean, sanitized, manageable. You throw away the broken things. You pretend the smell goes away. They pushed me to the center of the boards and started searching me like I was a threat. One man pulled out the old phone and flicked it on. Sam moved like he'd rehearsed this. He smiled, the kind that mistakes triumph for gentleness, and said, "We'll give you a chance to apologize. Tell us you were wrong." If apologies could unmake a clip, I'd have been asking for one by then. I kept my hands curled in my jacket. The recorder hummed inside my collar. A heavy came close, fingers combing my pockets. His hand brushed the old phone. For an instant that felt like a long photograph, his thumb pressed the voice clip. It played. On speakers in that great wooden belly, Sam's voice, Halbridge's voice, planning something. They sounded ordinary, mean, casual. But as the clip played, the room tilted. I watched eyes shift. I watched a slow ripple of recognition pass through the men who weren't used to being reminded of how dirty their own hands were. A silence fell like a wet blanket. One of the younger guys, the kind of man who still thinks he might escape this life, looked away, suddenly sickened. "We can't be tied to that," he muttered. Sam laughed, forcing it back into bravado. "We are tied to everything that keeps us in this town. You think a recorder changes that? You think a line from some county attorney will unmake us overnight?" But the gears shut inside him. The clip kept rolling. I had recorded the moment people tried to disarm me. I'd recorded them saying things they couldn't take back. The old phone in the heavy's hand, the recorded voices in a barn of wood, that clip became a map of their guilt. Then somebody drew a pistol. The room smelled like cold brass. The man with it had the same emptiness in his eyes as the men who wait outside trailer doors. A quick calculation told me he intended to make a spectacle. Pull a gun in front of witnesses and you leave no witnesses behind. Time compresses when you see that move. There is the moment the gun clears leather. Then the moment the finger squeezes, and then the false clarity afterward when you can see the choices you made laid out like empty chairs. My choice was to move. I lunged toward the man with the pistol, not to disarm him exactly. My hands did not have the strength for that, but to close the space and make a clean line between his gun and the rest of the room. Two men tackled me hard to the floor, the wood biting through my coat. A knee drove into my ribs hard enough to make me think of nothing but air. Pain became useful. It kept me awake. In the chaos, Mara's headlights flashed again at the open mill door. Someone near the entrance spotted her and shouted. The shout turned to a command. The younger guys hesitated, then turned to go outside to see what the fuss was. I felt something hit the back of my head, and for a second I saw a flash of the night, the open sky, a car moving away. Then I was on my knees with my hands tied behind me, the rope rough, biting skin. The man who tied me worked quietly like he was putting away a tool. Sam stood near the pit, overseeing the job. He looked like a man who believed in his own immortality. They discussed what to do with me like they would with a horse. They contemplated sending me to a neighbor town and letting me be found, a warning. They considered a hole in the woods. The language was whatever gets the job done, unadorned. I vowed then, stupid and hopeful, that I would not let them take me without making them pay for their certainty. The first step was simple: get the tape to someone who could act. It was buried in my jacket, safe by religion. I kept my lips moving in a stream of noise, hopping to keep them conversational. If they were uncertain, they would hesitate. Mara was outside the mill, hidden behind the stacked pallets. I could see her shadow like a twitch on the barn's wall. She'd put herself between them and me. That gamble meant something. I felt something like shame and gratitude tighten in my throat. The younger man who had hesitated earlier came back in with his face changed. He had the look of someone who had been asked to do a bad thing and saw a photo of himself doing it. He glanced at Sam and then at Sheriff Halbridge. Maybe it was the clip, maybe it was guilt, but he stepped between Sam and the rope. "What if this goes sideways?" he said, his voice shook. Sam's response was a smile that never touches the eyes. "It won't. We control the story. Then, tie him up in the old kiln, leave the rest to me." They took me to the kiln because practical people put people in practical places. The kiln was a circular room with one small window high up, enough for nothing but a sliver of moon. They pushed me inside and threw a chain across the door. The slamming sound was final in a way that made my skin crawl. From inside that yellowed room, I could hear them talking outside. The words were steps, planning points. They planned to move my brother, if he was still alive, to a place where he could be made into a story. They planned to make the town remember that some people don't get to open their mouths. I had one advantage. It was night and the town was a small place. People slept in their houses and weren't awake for the crimes until the morning. That gave Mara time. She was small town smart. If she couldn't call the state, she could call enough people with alarms to make shadows move. She could make witnesses. I sat in the kiln with my hands knotted behind me and listened until the wood cooled around me. Then I heard boots on the gravel moving away. They were taking my brother's fate to a storage shed behind Sam's property, the kind of place that smells like paint and oil and decay. That was where I had to go. I had to get out. Ropes are inexact when left by men who do not expect to revisit the knot. I worked my fingers until blood came. I bit a tendon and kept twisting until the fibers gave. Hours in that kiln felt like years. When I finally forced my wrist through, the pain made me see stars. I crawled to the window and looked out. The night had dulled. The moon was lower. The mill yard lay like a scattered beast. Someone left the main light on at the mill like a god had forgotten to turn it off. That light was both a crime and a tool. It meant there would be shadows to pass through. It meant someone would see if they looked the wrong way. I moved like a man stealing air. Every creak was a bill I could not pay. I scaled a ladder behind the kiln and dropped into a shadowed alley behind the building. My feet were slick with sawdust. I held the burner phone in my fist like a charm. I used it to text Mara, "I'm moving. Shed. Now." Her reply was immediate, "I'm on him. West Gate, don't do anything reckless." Reckless was what they expected. Disorganized was what they courted. I let them think I would be both. The storage sheds sit behind Sam's property in a cluster like a small village. They smell of gasoline and old insulation. The world becomes a place of soft reflections in the moonlight, metal roofs glinting like teeth. I crept between sheds until I found the one with the padlock cut. Doors lay open. In the back corner, he sat on a stack of pallets, his hands bound but not painfully so. He looked up at me like someone waking from a bad dream. His beard had grown, his eyes had hollowed. I didn't have time for goodbyes. I looked for a route back to the mill, for a place to hide. The layout in the dark swam. The mill was a magnet and I was the needle. Somewhere in the back of the property, I heard a van door slam, the sheriff's van. He was nearby. Mara found me as I lifted my brother. She had 2 other cars with her, ordinary folks who had been angry enough at rumor to follow a lead. They were not armed. They had more resolve than gear. They had the sense that whatever happened in town could be recorded and told. They had cameras on their phones and a faith in small things that still tied them to this place. We moved like a broken convoy, slow, opposed, careful. My brother had moved in ways that brought me back to the worst nights when I'd sit up watching him drink away his better sense. He was heavier than I expected. The sky held its breath. Halfway to the road, the headlights cut across us. The heavies had found our trail. They came out like wolves, and this time the sheriff was in front, holding a flashlight like he was a judge. When the beam washed over us, it showed faces. Sam smiling, the young man looking away, the heavies with hands on their belts. "You should have stayed sleeping," Sam said. The younger man stood between us. "We're done with this," he said. In a town built on quiet deals, that statement is a stone thrown into a pond. The ripple grows. Sam laughed low and hard. He gestured and one of his men lunged. Someone hit his back with a pipe. There was a sudden flash of violence, a messy human thing, and then more hands shoved and pulled. Mara ran, trying to draw attention. People in the nearby neighborhood stepped out of their houses because fights have a way of waking the town. The moment the neighbors arrived, the theater changed. The sheriff saw them. He saw faces he'd known since grade school. You can buy a lot of things, but a man cannot buy the look on his mother's face when he drags a neighbor's son across the yard. The heavies melted back, the argument losing shape. That's when the ambulance lights came. Not because we called an ambulance. Someone had filmed with their phone and uploaded a stream in a town that had a feed for everything. Somehow, the county cops had been alerted or a neighbor had called. There's a thing about small towns. Everyone can be complicit until one person is not. Then the rest remember they have faces. Sam made a run for the truck. The sheriff looked at him. He made a decision in a second that revealed everything. He stepped forward and pressed a hand to Sam's shoulder like he was taking counsel. He chose the town or the man. He chose wrong. A county cruiser, lights on, pulled into the yard, distant but authoritative. 2 officers jumped out, badges visible, faces tired but deliberate. They moved like people who had run toward trouble their whole careers. They called out commands. There is power in a uniform from outside the county. It is an effective sort of blunt force. Sam froze with the smoke of defeat in his nostrils. He had spent a lifetime counting on the sheriff's loyalty. When it faltered, he had no footing left. I don't remember all the yelling. I remember the young man with the empty face running away into the trees. I remember Sam trying to plead, and the sheriff stepping back like he realized his own skin would not protect him from what he had signed onto. I remember the heavy scattering like leaves. They placed Sam in the cruiser. The sheriff watched as his partner, a county detective, read Sam his rights. The look Holbrook gave me was not the look of a man who would walk free. It was the look of a man who had been counted out. As they loaded Sam, Mara came up to me and handed me my old phone. It was greasy with cedar and my palm was sticky. She looked at me with the kind of tiredness that feels like a found thing. "You idiot," she said, and the word was a blessing. In the backseat of a cruiser a few minutes later, the county detective asked me to tell the tape story again. He listened like a man who understood the shape of lies. He told me later that the clip was the key that opened the door for them to investigate. It was the kind of evidence you can hold up in a county office and make people answer for. Sam was charged. Holbrook lost his badge that night when the county arrested him for obstruction and later for aiding wrongdoing. The young man who had hesitated gave testimony. He had a conscience left and he used it. The heavies had mugshots taken under lights that made their faces real for the first time. It wasn't instant redemption. The town held its breath and rewired itself slowly. People argued in the diner. Business owners wondered what this meant for their bottom lines. There were threats and ugly notes slipped into mailboxes. Sam's empire had cracks, and sometimes cracks spread. My brother came home with bruises that faded, and with a look that never left him. He apologized in ways a man who'd been through something small and terrible can. Stammers and tears and a slow, professional kind of rebuilding. We took apart our lives and put them back together like someone reassembling broken furniture that's never quite the same. The part that sits with me is not the arrests. It is the night, the rope, and the small bravery of people who stepped out of houses and into the yard because a fight had started that belonged to them in ways the men in suits never understood. Courage in a small town is not always a headline. Sometimes it's a woman turning the lights on in her kitchen. Sometimes it's a kid recording with a shaky hand. Sometimes it's the neighbor who calls the state police even though it could change everything for them. I still carry the scar along my ribs from the kneecap that pressed too hard, a thin white line I take to the river sometimes to see how the water moves around it. I still wake sometimes and hear the mill creak, though the mill is quieter now. The clip is burned to a drive and handed to the state attorney. The mill is fenced and patrolled. Sam's name is a caution in town, the way they talk about him now a little softer, a little more like a ghost of a man they once admired. We didn't get everything. Someone always slips through. The sheriff's wife cried in the courtroom and people said things like, "You can't blame the family." There were petty injuries, threats, and a dozen small things to clean up, but we stopped a rot. We made the town look at itself in a way it hadn't for years. When I think back to that night, I think of my brother's face when he saw me approach in the shed. I think of Mara's headlights cutting through black and the sound of a county cruiser answering something that had been loud for so long. And I think of the recorder in my jacket, patient and true, that turned a plan into a line that law could follow. Sometimes the bravest thing a town does is choose to be real about itself. That night, a few of us chose it. I still go by the mill sometimes. It is quieter in the daytime, with the smell of old pine and the distant click of a saw. I stand at the fence and I watch the town move. People who do ordinary things will always be the most important people. They are the ones who make the headlines feel like a human thing rather than a sentence. I learned that you don't have to be a hero to make a difference. You only have to be stubborn enough to keep your mouth moving when everyone else wants silence. That's the smallest, ugliest, bravest truth I hold. When the county suits came to thank me, they handed me a paper and said the kind of things public men say. You did the right thing. I signed the paper because you sign papers when the law asks. I kept one of them in my wallet for a while, next to a photo of my brother before he started making the kind of choices that nearly killed him. The last thing I'll tell you, because the town deserves to be warned and also because I want to be honest, is this. There will always be men who look for power in the cracks of a place like ours. The difference is whether a few people stand, mudwakut, when the shadow reaches. That night, a few people chose to stand. The mill is still a place of wood and work. People buy sawdust for gardens. Kids still dare each other to climb parts of it they shouldn't. Life here is messy, stubborn, human in the way the best lives are. But sometimes late, when the wind comes from a certain direction, I can hear how the mill remembers. And I remember the night we turned the light on for good.